Scientists finally figure out why the water bear tardigrade is nearly indestructible. Freeze it, boil it, or expose it to radiation, the water bear shrugs it off, and now we know why. Philip Perry Big Think reports, the tardigrade, also known as the moss piglet or water bear, is a bizarre microscopic creature that looks like something out of a Disney nightmare scene. Strange, but not particularly threatening, the pudgy, eight-legged, waterborne creature appears to be perpetually puckering. It's the farthest thing from what you'd expect an unstoppable organism to look like. Yes, water bears can withstand even the vacuum of space, as one expert showed, a sort of microscopic Rasputin. Tardigrades have been frozen, boiled, exposed to extreme doses of radiation, and remarkably still survive. How do they do this has been a mystery to science until now. Being a waterborne creature, scientists in this experiment examined how it survived desiccation, or being completely dried out. When it senses an oncoming dry period, the critter brings its head and limbs into its exoskeleton, making itself into a tiny ball. It'll stay that way, unmoving, until it's reintroduced into water. It's the amazing ability that piqued Thomas Boothby's interest. He's a researcher at the University of South Carolina, Chapel Hill. Boothby told New York Times, "They can remain like that in a dry state for years, even decades, and when you put them back in the water, they revive within hours. After that, they're running around again, they're eating, they're reproducing like nothing happened." Originally, it was thought that the water bear employed a sugar called trehalose to shield its cells from damage. Brine shrimp, sea monkeys, and nematode worms use this sugar to protect against desiccation through a process called anhydrobiosis. Those organisms produce enough of the sugar to make it 20% of their body weight. Not the water bear. Trehalose only takes up to about 2% of its entire system when it's in stasis, though employing a sugar to preserve one's body sounds strange. The newly discovered process that the water bear goes through is even more bizarre. It turns itself into glass. In this study, tardigrades were placed into a drying out chamber, which mimicked conditions the organisms would encounter in a disappearing pond. As the water bears underwent anhydrobiosis, scientists examined what genes were activated, and these genes produce a certain protein, which they named tardigrade-specific intrinsically disordered proteins, TDPs for short. When the genes which produce TDPs were blocked, the water bears died. If you take those genes and put them into organisms like bacteria and yeast, which normally do not have these proteins, they actually become much more desiccate tolerant, Boothby said. And when the drying out process begins that such genes are activated, flooding the water bear system with a protective protein. The process occurs in much the same way as trehalose preserves sea monkeys, according to Boothby. And this is an example of convergent evolution, when two unrelated organisms develop the same trait for survival. Usually, proteins are formed in orderly 3D chains of amino acids, but TDPs operate differently in a kind of random, somewhat disorganized manner. Boothby said, "It's a really interesting question about how a protein without a defined three-dimensional structure can actually carry out its function in a cell. Another question is the protein used by any other organisms. When desiccation begins and TDP is activated, it engages a process known as vitrification. Boothby says, the glass is coating the molecules inside of the tardigrade cells, keeping them intact. From there, it goes into a form of stasis until it detects water. When that occurs, the protein is dissolved into the liquid and the tardigrade is revived. There could be some practical uses to this discovery. For instance, in medicine, vaccines often require refrigeration, but in the developing world, it is not always available, which makes delivering vaccines to vulnerable rural communities difficult. Dr. Boothby believes that we may be able to use TDP to sort of freeze-dry vaccines or medications for easy storage and transport. And what about putting humans in stasis for space travel or when they have terminal diseases to await a cure? No word on that yet. Scientists have years of research ahead of them already just to understand the inner workings of TDP. And some believe tardigrades may have alien DNA as well. This is on Collective Spark by Philip Perry from Big Think. Please leave your comments. Thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box.